So I want to thank all of the speakers. You know, we wouldn't have had this program if it weren't for you. They've put a lot of effort into their content, and it looks dynamite. So without further ado, I want to introduce Kryngle Daly. He's a fellow Clarkie, and I understand that there are some other Clark grads here tonight, and that's fun because we're all alma maters and rarely see each other, and I'm thrilled that WPI continues its support. The students are here, some of whom I know, and I'm thrilled. Frank Hoy is a big supporter, Paul Mack is a big supporter, and Gina Betty. And without WPI, it would be very difficult indeed for us to continue to make the traction and impact that we do. So I want to reiterate what Ed said. So without further ado, I want to introduce Kryngle. He's an inventor, so he's going to be coming from the inventor point of view, and he's dealing with algorithms and software, which from personal experience is probably some of the more technical IP that you can deal with. So all three will be addressing this area, but feel free to get your needs met tonight as well. Thank you for attending on such a cold night, and Kryngle, you can take it away.
Hello, and thank you. My name is Kryngle Daly. To give you a short background about myself, I'm a PhD biophysicist out of Clark, and then I also did my postdoc actually right across the little walkway in Olin Hall here at WPI. My background is essentially a trifecta of computer science, physics, and biology. The PhD technically is in physics, but I specialize in modeling and studying biological systems, and that is somewhat important to this. So what I'd like to do is basically tell you quickly what the technology that KBioBox has, what runs it, where it came from, and then we'll get into the patent process. And it's important to understand those first three before any sense happens out of the patent process we went through. So basically, what do we have? We have this magical diagnostic box, right? So who's ever been sick, right? All right, there's one or two liars out there, but okay. So for anyone who's ever been sick, who knows exactly which bacteria or virus was making you sick? Anyone? Right? It's a good thing to know, right? As we use more and more broad-spectrum antibiotics, we're creating superbugs. And also, modern reports coming out are saying that antibiotics really don't do anything more than mess up your liver and not make you feel better. So what if there was a magical way in which you could very quickly know exactly what pathogen, so what bacteria or virus or amoeba or fungus, is running around your system making you very sick? Well, to do that, you'd have to combine modern DNA sequencing technology with some very powerful modern computing. And the problem with that is the way you do it currently is you have a room about this size full of thousands of computers working together, and you have another room about half this size full of all sorts of modern DNA sequencing equipment. Wouldn't it be fantastic if you could shrink that down not only spatially but time-wise? And wouldn't it be great if it fit in a shoebox? And you're probably guessing where I'm going with this. It can and it does. So what we have, so the DNA sequencing technology is not ours, but there are a few examples of DNA sequencing technology. The biggest one is from Oxford Nanopores out of England. They have this very cool USB DNA sequencer. That goes there. The rest of this is our magical technology, which I'll talk about in a minute. But what this shoebox in general does is a patient sample goes in here, and less than 8 hours later, you receive a report that tells you exactly what bacteria or virus is making you sick, and also off the DNA from the patient in that sample, the best therapeutic to use for that patient on that pathogen. So a very personalized medicine. And yes, diagnostics currently are too damn slow. Anyone who's ever had who's knows someone who's been sick for more than 6 months? We're just going through diagnostic test after diagnostic test. And anyone more than a year or two? Right? And the way they do it now is basically growing things in petri dishes and throwing therapeutics on it and just trying to see what works. This is an all-in-one, we test for every virus and bacteria under the face of the sun in one shot. So if the NIH or the CDC has heard about it, it's in here. So how does that work? So essentially what we have, even though these are not my favorite words, but it's a novel big data engine that is very highly tuned for genomic style data. So data that's very sparse and chaotic, meaning lots of the same little things repeated over and over again, and most likely the data coming in is a jumbled mess and it's not in any particular order and it's just a disaster. And what we can do with it is we can actually match gigabytes of that in about 20 minutes against terabytes of data. So to translate that into English, what does that mean? If you take a bacteria or a virus and you do the complete full genetic sequencing of its genome, you get a file that's maybe a few hundred megabytes. Okay, if you do a human, you get a file that's about 3 to 6 gigabytes. So that's not too bad to work with from a file size. The problem are the databases you have to compare that against. When you add up all the databases with all the different species for bacteria and viruses and humans, you end up with tens and 20s of terabytes of data that you have to match gigabytes against. And this is the current problem. No one can do this fast enough except for us. The other cool thing is we do this on absolutely minimal hardware. This is the thing in my basement. It turns out the thing that is doing the crunching is the third thing down from the top. And I know I was using the word thing way too many times there. The thing at the item at the top is just a router. The second thing down is a web server. The third thing down is our magic box. Okay, it's the bigger version of this thing, and it was the first one we built. There are some people who have come close, or sorry, the people who have come the closest to doing it as quickly and as efficiently as we have is a group from one of the University of California's. They can do it in about 6 hours, but they need 5,000 computers on the Amazon cloud to do it. And they're also limited to 5,000 species, where we are not limited by that. Okay, so who cares? What do you do with that? Well, you analyze DNA, you do bioinformatics, right? So the two big things we're doing, first is the clinical research and diagnostics, so the thing on the left. Basically, species identification. If you give us what's called a FASTA file, so one of the files that comes off a DNA sequencer, we can tell you what's in that file. We can tell you all the different species. We can tell you roughly the relative amounts of those species, and some other information. We're starting to use this with some work in conjunction with UMass Medical and Children's Hospital. With Children's Hospital, it's in what's called the metagenomics environment, which is the microbiome, so the gut fauna, the hundreds of species in there, and trying to understand that better as it relates to irritable bowel syndrome and Crohn's disease and all these other things that are popping up. The other neat one is we can actually do gene therapy design very quickly. There are now these enzymes called CRISPRs and Cas9s and TALENs that were discovered about 5 years ago. And these are nifty little enzymes that actually let you go in and reprogram DNA. However, you have to design them very carefully such that they only alter the DNA that you want them to alter, not other chunks of it. Also, Worcester's own Nobel laureate, Craig Mello, his discovery, the siRNAs or RNAis, this technology can be used to design those as well. So, now that you have an idea of what we do, I'm going to take you step by step through how we submitted our IP and point out some of the things that worked well for us, but more importantly, the things that blew up in our face. So the first thing we did in July of 2013 was we submitted a provisional patent. For those of you who don't know, a provisional patent was a creation of Bill Clinton. And basically the idea is submitting a full patent is expensive. It can be tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. And if you're an inventor in a garage, you don't have the resources for that, nor do you really want to risk them. The idea of a provisional patent is it's about $135, and I think that's correct if I remember, right? To submit it if you're what's called a micro entity. And basically what they do is they put your idea in an envelope and put it on a shelf. And then when you submit a full patent, if your full patent is granted and it matches what you wrote in the provisional patent, you get the filing date of the provisional patent. So it gets you a timestamp, essentially. It's a bit more complicated than that, but I'll leave that to the IP lawyers. It's the rough idea. And then I purposely left that big gap there. The reason I left that big gap there is because between July of 2013 and essentially May of 2014, we did nothing with our IP, and that was a massive mistake. Kind of like a teenager with his first car who's so excited to run around and show it off to everybody, but forgets to put gas in the car. We were excited about our technology. We had a provisional patent. We ran around telling everybody about it, and then all of a sudden we had 2 months to write a patent. So don't do that, right? May 2014, we started interesting art searching. As I've been educated about, you should not call it prior art searching, especially in an email, because if you call it if you say that you found prior art, even in a simple email to your lawyer, that can be used against you if you ever have to defend your IP. May, June, July, we worked with the IP lawyers. July 2014, we filed the full utility patent, and then now we're at the point of hurry up and wait. So it's in there. Unfortunately, in the life sciences and the biotech area, there's about a 1.5 to 2 year waiting period before a patent clerk even gets to your application. We did hear one thing, the PCT, so the international filing. We heard something back in November of 2014, and I'll tell you what that is in a minute. And like I said, and now we wait. There's a 1.5 to 2 year waiting. We're only about 6 or 8 months in, so who knows. So the first thing we did, we wrote our own provisional patent, right? So I was fresh out of the ivory tower. I had completed a postdoc here, had developed the basic part of this technology, and we wanted to protect it. But we hadn't raised any funds yet. We didn't have much money. So, okay, provisional patents are kind of cheap. I knew some people who said they had written their own. So, okay, let's do that. That can't be too bad of an idea. The website Nolo, which has all sorts of legal templates and whatnot, sells this great little book called Patent Pending in 24 Hours. It's more of a workbook than a book. Chapter by chapter, it has you write things down and answer questions, and then the last chapter is put it all together, and you get a provisional patent out of it. You can submit that electronically. And for us, it did actually take about 24 hours for the amount of time we put into it. And we ended up with this nice little provisional patent that was on file, and we thought we were fantastic. However, looking back, there was a lot of problems with this. The biggest one was the risk of a huge disconnect between the provisional patent and our actual filed utility patent. And yeah, these guys are laughing. They're like, yep. And the problem there is, unless you've done it before, and even if you've done it before but you're not an IP attorney, your language is not great. You don't know the right words to use to describe the right things. Even when I speak about our interesting art searching, we learned better words, but they were still not the best words. The other issue is, when the IP attorneys help you and you actually file a full patent, if the language is so different, there you run the risk of invalidating your provisional patent, where you don't receive the initial timestamp because it's decided that it's too different from the actual filing. So the biggest advice there is, even if it's informal legal help or just quick legal help, start talking to the IP lawyers early. There's also a lot of general strategy issues around this. That's something we learned is when we filed the provisional, we had filed essentially with 3 pieces: a hardware piece, a software piece, and an algorithm piece. And as it turned out, the software piece, it didn't have a chance at all based on the current US rules. As we developed the technology, the hardware piece became moot, and really what we should have been focusing on was the algorithm side of the thing. That was what was patentable, and there was some things, had we known earlier on, would have been better, and I'll get to those in a minute. All right, interesting art searching. So as I mentioned a second ago, you're not supposed to call it prior art, especially in emails to lawyers. They get very upset. The best thing about searching for interesting art, so art that pre-existing patents that might be very similar to your technology, is first, it lets you know, is it worth filing a patent? Does somebody else already own this? Second, you learn a lot of the language, and it helps to redefine the language that you should use in your patent. In our case, there was a few issues of nomenclature where I was using more physics-style nomenclature when I should have been using a more computer science nomenclature. And had we done interesting art searching, even at the point of the provisional patent, we could have written a much better one. So I'd encourage anyone to do this early on. There's a bunch of good patent searching sites. One is lens.org. If anyone had heard of Patent Lens, this is what they are now. It's a free thing. It searches all international, all US patents. It stays up to date with the USPTO, so it's a fantastic resource. You can search, it has a million ways you can refine your queries. You can get the full PDFs of the documents and whatnot. And a very important thing to do is, as you dig through these websites and find things, share the results with your IP attorney, right? And that's important for 2 reasons, is A, maybe you find something they did not find, or B, more importantly, perhaps you're not thinking about this in the best way possible. And by looking at your results, your IP attorneys are going to say, whoa, whoa, back up and go look over here instead. This is more important. And I will admit, this is very scary at first. The first 3 times or so I did this, and I actually had help from a friend who's essentially somewhere in between an inventor and an IP attorney. He's very good at searching for prior art and things of that sort. You find a few things, and your first reaction is, holy cow, this is exactly what I have. and then you think everything's been for naught and you throw it out the window. It's actually not that bad, and what's really important is if you do find things like that early on, is being able to maneuver and change your technology or your patent so that you're not imposing on someone else. I heard this explained very well, is there's a huge field and everybody wants to farm goats. But in order to farm goats, you have to put up a little fence to keep your goats in. And ideally, you want to get your fenced-in area as big as possible without having your fenced-in area overlap anyone else's fenced-in area. Actually, that example is a bit weirder after I say it out loud, but it gets the idea across, right? And then it also starts leading into two very important questions that have to be tackled in the patent itself, and that is, how are you different, and/or how have you improved on an existing technology, which are two of the main criteria for a patent. All right, so then moving on, we got to writing the patent. And this part is scary in a different direction, right? Fortunately, we had the help of the lawyers at Morris, Barnes, Brown, and Pendleton up in Waltham, and we had some fantastic lawyers up there who had a good handle on the computational and the biological side, so they got us through it. But as I said, the provisional patent, we had the three pieces: the hardware piece, the software piece, and our secret sauce algorithms. And essentially, once we started speaking with them, they said, okay, the software part, you can't patent anyways, it's gone, get it out of here. And at that point, we had realized the unique hardware configuration we thought we needed, we really did not need, so that was thrown out. And that left us with the challenge was essentially ours was what we were trying to patent was an algorithm implemented in software. And that can be very, very tricky, as algorithms can be very general, and you want to apply it to as many. So there's a balance, right? You want to have your patent as general as possible, but you want it specific enough so they'll grant it, right? You can't apply to the USPTO and say, I want a patent for breathing, but you can apply and say, I want a patent for diaphragmatic breathing or something like that. And what helped guide us through that is there's a thing called the Foundation for a Free Information Infrastructure, and they deal with a lot of software, internet, open source software sharing issues. But they define a software patent as a patent on any performance of a computer realized by means of a computer program. And this was actually very important for us, as there are bioinformatics programs out there, such as BLAST or BWA or Bowtie, that do essentially what we do, but we greatly improve over them. And that's really our niche for where our patent would come from. And the other catch to it is the technologies have to not be obvious to an expert in the field. So let's say somebody is an expert, I don't know, car mechanic, right? And some other inventor comes along and says, hey, I have this great idea. All the tires keep falling off. Let's put lug nuts on them. You know, to an expert in a field, that's an obvious solution. What might not be an obvious solution is the particular way you design the lug nuts to go on the car, but there's a big and very important difference between the two, and you need to be conscientious of that as you write your patents and move through the process. Okay, and then so being in the biotech world, biotech is not unique to this country, and also with our type of services, as it is going to be set up as a software as a service, ideally through a web portal for the gene editing technologies. And then for this end of it, it's going to be updated through a web service as well. It's very easy for us to go international. So then the issue there is we have to have international protection, and especially within the biotech international community, South America and Brazil are blowing up with this as well. So we wanted to make sure we had protection. And when you speak about international patents, you hear PCT all the time. PCT stands for the Patent Cooperation Treaty. I'll let you read that little thing on your own, but basically it's an agreement between about 148 countries saying, hey, we're gonna have one central repository, we're gonna keep track of everybody's patents, and we'll have people that you can pay to search, you know, to see, are you maybe have a chance for a patent in China but not in Brazil, or maybe not in Brazil but in Ireland or something of that sort. And it can be useful because you will actually get search results from them for the United States faster than you will get from the USPTO. And that actually happened to us. At the time we submitted our utility patent, we also submitted a PCT. These things, they're actually not too bad. They're about $4,000 roughly to submit. And we actually received a fairly quick response back from them. And what they came back to us and said was that, hey, your patent isn't one invention, it's actually two inventions. And that's actually something where if we had worked with the IP lawyers earlier, the IP lawyers would have had a chance to pick up on that. But you know, that's another way we shot ourselves in the foot. But the nice thing here is we have this early warning from the PCT, or it's actually from the WIPO, but from our PCT search. So now we can expect something from the US Patent Office when they respond. So we've already started working on the two inventions issue. They also returned us a few results for each invention, so we've already been able to start putting together a response to the USPTO. So the two biggest things that I would take out of all this and encourage everyone to, if you are going to pursue IP for a technology, to make sure you heed. So the first one is your relationship with your IP lawyer. Make sure you find someone that even on a, what I would call a fun level, you get along with. Okay? If you're personality type A and their personality type Q, and even when you're both being professional, you just don't sync, it's not going to be worth it. They're not going to be able to help you as well as you can. This is something we learned early on, and we actually ended up switching our attorneys because the first group we were working with, we just didn't really mesh with them very well. The other thing is, do they truly understand your technology? Do they get it? You know, I have the little thing here, don't buy fish from a coal miner, right? Coal miner doesn't know anything about fish. Why would you go to a law firm that perhaps is very experienced in electrical engineering type patents, so circuit boards or CPUs or something, to write a pharmaceutical patent? You wouldn't. Make sure that they really get it. Make sure that they have experience in your field. The different sections of the patents sometimes the language is very different and they're written very differently. So make sure they get it. I like to include the caveat, if they can't explain it back to you in layman's terms, they probably don't get it. It's also great when you explain your technology to them and they get all excited because they see how phenomenal it is. The other big thing we goofed up was we simply waited too long for professional help. Back to the gap. We were all excited. We had submitted our provisional patent and we said, hooray, we'll write a patent in a year and then off we go. When in reality, we're shooting ourselves in the foot. As what would have been much smarter for us is as we developed the technology with every little tweak and change we went through, it would have been better to speak to the attorneys and understand when we should have submitted a second provisional patent and then a third, maybe even once a month, once every 2 weeks as the technology progresses. And what happens then is you get earlier timestamps. So in our situation, we did invent a bunch of stuff between the time the provisional was filed and the full utility was filed. And the problem is, for the things we invented between the provisional and the utility, we're only going to get the timestamp of the utility because it was not in the provisional. Whereas if we had submitted lots of little provisionals as we went along, you know, we could have gotten some earlier timestamps on various pieces and whatnot. It is also scary because it's expensive, right? You think lawyer, you think, okay, there goes the bank, right? It's worth it for the risk here, and I would also say it's probably not as expensive as you would think. Our IP costs in total, once you added them all up, was only about 20 grand, which when you start doing even friends, family, and fools, raising money from them, that's really not a lot of money, and if you have a decent credit score, it's not too much to put on a credit card. So there are ways of handling that. And with that, thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions. Feel free to contact me outside of this if you're interested in hearing more about what we went through or learned from, or if you'd like to use our services. Thank you, please. So, and with that, I'd take any questions.
Did you raise funds from any person or organization?
So we've only done what's called the triple F round, so the family, friends, and fools, right? And that's basically just finding your family and your friends who are able to raise money and convincing them to give it to you. The way we did it was, and I can give you more details during the break and whatnot, 2 forms of promissory notes. And I have to thank Jerry Shapiro for one of them, the convertible note. So there's a thing called a royalty note. So for investors who are not SEC accredited, which is basically most of us, so you have to make $200,000 a year for 2 years or more, or you have to have a net worth of, I believe it's $1 million, not including your house. If you do that, then you can do what's called a convertible note, which lets them invest, and when you have a valuation on your company, converts to equity in the company. The other one is a royalty note, and that's basically a promissory note where they get paid back 4 times what they invested at some future point. So there's a lot of begging and please grandma and please Uncle Bob and things of that sort. But and it's slow at first, but don't give up on it. Just keep pounding away.
When you talked about, I have a question. When you talked about it being scary, did anybody talk with you about, and you don't have to get into specifics, the liability in if they found something and someone challenged your IP? Did the attorneys go over that with you?
The attorneys did, yes. And also, I had he wished to remain nameless. We'll call him Ralph, right? So Ralph was helping me with the interesting art searching, and he spoke to me about this as well. And what they said is, ideally, no one wants to go to court over this stuff, right? So if you do find something that is very close to matching you or does exactly match you, you have a few options. One, I think I mentioned when I was babbling away, is can you maneuver your technology in a different direction? Can you tweak it for some other use that would not violate their patent? Or the other one is just call them up and say, hey, we're doing something similar to what you already have, and maybe we're doing it in a new way that they hadn't thought of, and have that conversation with whoever holds the IP. So then at that point, not all is lost. Maybe there's a business potential with them through that route. So.